The greatest player of all time, winning the greatest World Cup final of all time. But was 2022 the greatest World Cup of all time? In the 12 years from when the 2022 World Cup was given to Qatar to the moment the tournament kicked off, the build-up was dominated by controversies regarding the home nation. From its strict Sharia law, to its treatment of migrant workers, to its record on LGBTQ rights, and the corruption scandal leading to Qatar being awarded the tournament. However, this tournament seemed to go by without any major issues, with much fewer instances of crowd trouble than in previous World Cups. However, some issues that were raised going into the tournament occurred, including the Rainbow Armband campaign to raise awareness for LGBTQ rights, which was banned, whilst Jewish and Israeli fans and journalists reported harassment. So, for $200 billion, was the World Cup worth it for Qatar? Did the magic on the pitch hide the darkness off the pitch? Will this tournament go down as one of the best, or was this merely a masterclass in sports washing? Was the 2022 World Cup a success?
So let's get to it. Was the 2022 Qatar World Cup a success? As always, we begin with this quickfire round, 30 seconds each, and we pick up the debate right after. So Barnaby Lane, take the lead.
I think it depends from what perspective you look at it. Qatar would say it was a success. Like was mentioned in that short video, a lot of the problems that seemed to be materialising before the tournament perhaps didn't come to light throughout. They'll look back and think it was a success. But for, fans across the world who were continually made aware of those issues throughout, I would suggest that perhaps there'll be a cloud that hangs over it when people look back.
Emily Austin, your take?
I think it depends on who you're asking, similar to what he said. If you look at it from a moral perspective, this was one of possibly the biggest moral stains that ever happened. Then again, you do have Beijing and you have more examples of the time where money counts over morals.
Yeah.
And in this situation for Qatar, it was a huge success because look how many people they got to come to their country. Look at the fame, they got the money. It's not even a question. And not to mention the game really masked over the human rights violations because it was a matchup made in heaven.
Yoav, Borowitz, last but not least, your thoughts?
I think the World Cup was a success. It was a success for Qatar, no doubt about it, because the sports washing does work mostly. And eventually, I think we'll see more tourism, way more tourism to Qatar. Like today, there's a huge amount of tourism to UAE. Nobody asks about the UAE regime, when millions and millions of people come. And I think it's going to be the same thing with Qatar. But, I think sometimes less is more. And yesterday, putting the black gown over Leo Messi after winning the final, that was a mistake.
And you know what? Let's begin from this point exactly. And from this point onwards, please feel free to interact, dear panelists. This traditional Arab gown, this bish that was put on Messi. Is Qatar trying too hard to make this tournament all about it? Yoav.
Yeah, I think it was too much. I think because eventually you see Leo Messi wearing black. Even in Qatar, everybody, the locals are wearing this beautiful white gown, but they gave him a black gown and he's wearing black. All the other Argentina players wearing white and blue. So he's looks different. But it's very symbolic because Leo Messi works for the Qataris. He works for Paris Saint-Germain. It's owned by Qatar. So Leo Messi can definitely not refuse to this gesture we can see the picture now, giving to him by the Emir of Qatar. So I think that was a bit too much, pushing it on the Qataris, who I was there for almost a month and I didn't feel they were pushing a lot of things, not anything. And actually the atmosphere there was very good in most cases and people really enjoyed themselves and there was a sense of freedom, at least for the World Cup time. So I think that was a case of a bit, losing by adding.
So Emily, what did the beauty and drama of football, of soccer, make people simply forget about human rights?
Honestly, it does. And with all due respect, I disagree so far with many of the things you said, meaning after this event, I don't think the tourism is going to skyrocket significantly because yes, it masked a lot of human rights violations, but let's not forget the LGBTQ community was very much disrespected. You mentioned they put on a gown. I'm all about respect, especially when it comes to other cultures. But by hosting this World Cup, you need to understand other cultures are going to be in your country, and you need to respect them back as well. And I don't feel like it was a mutual respect.
Yeah, but you should ask yourself whether the LGBT community is respected in the UAE, and you see tens of millions of tourists there every year. I do think Qatar, eventually, it's not going to be the UAE, it's not going to be Dubai or Abu Dhabi, but I think the tourism will skyrocket because I think most people don't ask themselves all those moral questions before they go to a specific country. And the same applies to China. The last World Cup was in Russia, and we all know what Russia has been doing, for years now. And so people now, it's not right also to just to corner Qatar and to say Qatar is mean and all the other cases are okay. So I think we should be a bit more, we should put things relative to other cases. And in the world of sports, a lot of countries are far from being perfect, and still you have events hosted them over there and things of that nature. And I do think that this World Cup actually improved the situation in Qatar, even for the foreign workers. I talked with a lot of them, and so their situation has improved in the last few years. It's still not good enough, no doubt about it. But we should realize that 90% of the people in Qatar are foreign workers. Some of them are building buildings, some of them are working in coffee shops, some of them are owning restaurants, and some of them are very rich people. You have all the cases down there in Qatar.
Barnaby, do you think that the World Cup changed Qatar?
I'm not sure. I think we won't know that until years down the line. The reality is those issues that existed 10 years ago when this tournament was awarded to Qatar still exist now. Obviously, today, the day after the final, and it was whatever you might say about it, it was quite a beautiful spectacle. Probably not many people are thinking of it, but with the perhaps the profits that have been made from it, the awareness that has been brought to the global community about those issues, perhaps they will change for the better in the future. But as of now, no, it doesn't change overnight. Cultures don't change overnight, and there's still a lot of time and work to be done.
So, please,
Ellie, another issue we should take into account. Everybody's talking about the World Cup because soccer is the biggest sport in the world. But let's not forget, Qatar has been hosting major, huge sporting events there for years now. The World Championship in track and field, the World Championship in handball, so many huge events in tennis. Now, when those things happened, the world was silent. Nobody said a word. But now when it's soccer, everybody's talking, and a lot of people have issues, and it's okay to have issues. It's okay to criticize. It's very important. But let's not forget, it's not that it was, Qatar was not existing, and suddenly it is. It's on the map. No, it's been on the map for many, many years now.
Yes, and obviously.
You can't compare the popularity of football, soccer, to track and field. Those two they're not even in the same stratosphere in terms of the viewership, popularity across the world. So, there might have been a small group of people who followed those what we'd say minority sports that were aware of those problems. But this is the biggest sporting spectacle in the world.
No doubt.
Yoav, what you said was a really...
Please, Emily.
What you both said was a good point. Yoav, you mentioned how everyone's focusing on Qatar because it's soccer, and you mentioned Russia, and I mentioned Beijing earlier, but you're right, and that's the problem. People are picking and choosing when you care about human rights, and you said, when people tour countries, you don't think about the human rights violations. That's the exact problem I'm trying to address here. You should, because you never know when that one example of the journalist killed could be you next.
But
of course, but the problem is that most people go to the UAE without considering all those issues, And I'm not saying it's right, not at all. Don't misunderstand. I'm just saying that's the way it is. And people go to China without examining a lot of issues, and people go to other countries. So that's a situation. I'm not talking all of the people, but definitely most of them.
I would like to bring into the conversation a counterclaim, if you will. The tournament saw no arrests of fans, and the usually rowdy England fans, usually rowdy England fans, and women also claimed that they never felt safer while watching games in those stadiums and moving around the area altogether. So has Qatar created, to an extent, a new, possibly better standard for watching football, soccer?
No.
No.
Because Russia did the same thing 4 years ago. You know, that was dubbed. You know, Russia has all sorts of problems with sports hooliganism and violence that are associated, especially with football. But that was dubbed the safest World Cup ever at the time because there was, you know, perhaps an element of fear from above saying that if you cause trouble, this happens, you know, it's not going to go particularly well for you. That doesn't mean that those issues don't exist in the country. Just look at where Russia is right now. Qatar might have done a good job of cleaning those things up for a week, but, a month or two. But I don't think that means that they've changed forever.
Emily, glass half full or not so much?
You know, I'd like to be glass half full. I just think that the magnitude I mentioned earlier definitely masked the situation. It didn't get rid of the situation. It merely just, you know, took over in terms of the media. Everyone was highlighting how beautiful the tournament was. Everyone had a great time. This was probably one of the most entertaining World Cups possibly ever. But it very much distracted the fact that Qatar does have all of these issues, and it just took the attention off of it for a little bit.
So as we're nearing the end of part one of our discussion here, what would we say would be Qatar's legacy from this tournament, Yoav?
I think that the legacy is that it was a very successful tournament. It was ran very well. I don't think the other things were distracted, not at all. I think that because of the World Cup, there's a flashlight on a lot of things that are not convenient for Qatar. Now, they're not stupid there. They know that everybody's talking about the issues we are talking about, and it's been going on for a long time. But the tournament was held well, and I felt over there for almost a month, no violence, there's no crime apparently there. Everybody felt very safe. And it was, you know, over there during the World Cup, it was a very, very pleasant place to be. Although for Israelis, for Israeli media, sometimes not so much. But that's a totally different issue. I don't think it has to do so much with Qatar, but with the Palestinian issue.
You know what, Yoav, it reminds me of the claim, or rather the hardcore data, that during COVID we had less car accidents, right? Because people were simply not driving. So maybe in a similar sense, it was a smooth sail because people couldn't just be themselves. Maybe, just maybe. We're putting a stop right here, taking a very short break, but Emily Austin, Barnaby Lane, and Yoav Borowitz are staying with us as we continue our debate and expanding perhaps the conversation. Is sports washing the most beneficial mechanism for political and diplomatic interest? We're out for a break. Back in a bit. Do not go anywhere. Welcome back to the summit. Still with us, Yoav Borowitz, Barnaby Lane, and Emily Austin. Thanks for staying with us. Before we go back to our conversation, as we've been reporting earlier in the show, the January 6th committee convening its final public hearing is happening as we speak. And in the past 5 minutes or so, Representative Jamie Raskin confirms that the committee will indeed recommend criminal charges, criminal charges against former and presidential hopeful Donald Trump. We're talking charges of obstructing an official proceeding, conspiracy to defraud the United States, conspiracy to make a false statement, and insurrection. The final say, however, is of the Justice Department, and it does not have to adopt the recommendation, even if submitted officially. Drama in Washington, this is for sure. We're keeping close tabs on this story, and we'll continue to bring you updates once they become available. But back to our discussion now, and before we go back to the conversation, let's take a listen to this.
We're in the middle of a World Cup, and we have a successful World Cup. And this is something that you want to talk about right now. I mean, death is a natural part of life, whether it's at work, whether it's in your sleep. Of course, a worker died. Our condolences go to his family. However, you know, I mean, it's strange that this is something that you wanted to focus on as your first question.
Yeah, truly an unforgettable statement there on behalf of the Qatari official in the aftermath of Another report of a foreign worker getting injured there. Death is part of life. This is what he said. So let's get to it. Has this tournament showed more than anything else that the rich do profit when it comes, that their profits rather come before human lives. Let's begin with another quickfire round and pick the conversation from there. Emily Austin, is money everything?
You know, unfortunately, especially in sports, money does overlap a lot of the morals, especially when it comes to these rich people. They do definitely prioritize money. And it's just a shame because it became so normalized that people actually seem to stop caring and people became desensitized to it. But it simply does not remove the fact that, yes, lives were lost. He said it in singular. He said one man died. Reports show a lot more than one person died. And the fact that death is a part of life doesn't mean that it's okay or it's normal or that's how it should be.
Yes, that's an understatement. Perhaps, Borowitz, your thoughts?
I agree completely with Emily. I think that it's the tragedies. Nothing justifies. Nothing justifies losing human lives. Although we should also say that human lives here in Israel, people die, construction workers die a lot, not related to sports, building, or something like that. Those tragedies sometimes happen, but of course in Qatar it happened way, way more. Although the situation did improve in the last 2 or 3 years in terms of the deaths, no doubt about it, but still, it can never be justified.
Barnaby Lane, your take?
Yeah, I mean, I think it might be a bold statement to say that the rich people don't, care about lives. I think in the case of Qatar, it certainly seems that way. Yeah, given that these comments have come from people who are very much at the top of running this tournament. Yeah, definitely.
So let's please feel free to engage in the conversation now, and let's shift the focus perhaps not on Qatar but on the West, playing along with the tournament there. Numerous world leaders, Emmanuel Macron, Elon Musk, and of course Mohammed bin Salman, taking part of this event. Was Qatar's true goal political to begin with?
I just want to say, nobody.
Please
go ahead.
No, Emily, please take the lead.
No, I'd just like to also add, if you were really outraged about this tournament, nobody forced you to go. You did not have to participate. I thought the same thing about the Beijing Olympics. If the human rights violations really did bother you, nobody was putting a gun to your head and forcing you to come. Every single person that participated, every person that viewed it, they went there voluntarily. And if, human lives and morality means something to them, they definitely had the option to not participate. Would it have been a huge deal? Of course. But if it's really something that means something to you, you should have just not went.
So does it say more about the West, the Western hypocrisy, so to speak, more than it does on Qatar, Yoav?
First of all, I think a lot of millions of Europeans did actually boycott this tournament and they didn't come. The South Americans, the North Americans, the Arab world for sure, the Israelis for sure, they came in huge numbers, but the Europeans less. Now, I'm not a big believer in boycotting because I think if we'll start boycotting so many things in the world, so many events should be boycotted, and let's start with our own countries first. People should first of all look into themselves, into their communities, their own countries, and ask over there what things should be boycotted and what can we live with and what can we not. So I'm not a big believer in boycotting specific events worldwide because of certain regimes.
Barnaby?
Yeah, I agree with you there. That boycotting might not always be the answer. Obviously, that this tournament and the previous tournament, the way that they were won or awarded was equally as controversial as the tournament itself. Boycotting it, I'm not sure if that solves the issue. Is it not a case of now the tournament has been there, now we just take the information we have? And I think actually there has been, for the first time at a major sporting event, different type of coverage from the media in terms of these issues have been highlighted quite heavily, whereas I don't remember that being that way before. So I think there's a slight change there, and hopefully something good can come from that. At the end of the day, hindsight is a wonderful thing, but we can't change anything now, right? We have to just deal with what's the cards we've been presented.
So let's indeed ditch the hindsight and look ahead. One of the favorites to win hosting rights for the 2030 World Cup is Saudi Arabia. Did Qatar open the door for autocratic regimes to use sports wash to better their image, so to speak?
I think autocratic regimes.
Yes, we will hear all of you. Of course, Yoav, take the lead.
So I think autocratic regimes have been sports washing for years and for decades. Now, I would want Saudi Arabia to host the 2030 World Cup because I think it will do good things to Saudi Arabia. I think it will make Saudi Arabia way more liberal. And I think also this is part of what MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, wants. Now, we don't know for sure, but I think hosting the World Cup did good things to Qatar, will do good things to Saudi Arabia as well. And hopefully it will happen.
Emily, do you think Saudi Arabia should be hosting?
Honestly, I think it just set a bad precedent by this World Cup happening in Qatar. Because now you can't say, oh, well, Saudi shouldn't host it because they're no better or, I mean, debatable, but they're no better or worse than Qatar itself. So it would be hypocritical to now criticize them and not criticize Qatar. Or like, I think it was Yoav mentioned earlier, not criticizing Russia. I just think it sets a really bad precedent for the future. It's like, I love sports and I wish sports didn't have to be political and I hope it doesn't get political. But why put these wonderful, amazing sports that's supposed to build bridges into the hands of people that still execute their own civilians?
But maybe sports can have a reverse effect. Maybe through sporting events, countries can change for the better, Barnaby?
I think you'd like to think so, but I think it's a lot more complex than that. I don't think there are definitely positives that can come from it, but whether or not it can overhaul a whole, culture and a way of living it is different. It's a really difficult thing to do.
I think we should also look at what's happening now with Iran vis-a-vis the national team and the support to the national team. The national team is taking a stand mostly against the leadership, against the regime. And I met so many Iranian fans in Qatar who did not say anything about Qatar, but they said things against their regime in Iran. And I think sports can actually build bridges and even when it's hosted, even when events are hosted in countries that are not democratic, that are not liberal, I think eventually it has a more positive effect on them than a negative effect. That's what I felt in Qatar. That's my belief.